The morning was crisp and cold, the kind of morning where the world feels frozen in place. For Michael, it was just another Saturday spent with his daughter, Emma. They lived in a modest house on the outskirts of town, and while life hadn't been easy, it had always been theirs. His wife, Rachel, had passed away 2 years ago, leaving Michael to raise Emma on his own. Despite the difficulties, he had found a new rhythm, a new balance in his life, one that revolved around Emma. Today, they were at Crystal Pond, their favorite spot. It was a place that had always been special to them. The pond had been frozen for weeks, and although it was cold enough to skate on, Michael had always been cautious. Emma, however, loved it. She was an adventurous spirit, just like her mother had been. She loved to feel the thrill of the ice beneath her skates, the wind rushing through her hair. Today, Michael had promised her that they could skate for as long as she wanted. As they arrived, the sun was still low in the sky, casting long shadows over the glistening ice. Michael helped Emma with her skates, tying them tightly, making sure she was safe. They had skated here countless times, and today felt like no different than the others. The air was quiet, save for the sound of the blades carving into the ice and the occasional laugh from Emma as she skated in circles around him. "Be careful, Emma," Michael called, his voice carrying across the ice. He smiled as he watched her skate ahead, her laughter echoing in the stillness. It was moments like this that made everything worth it. But then, the ice cracked. The sharp, splitting sound of ice fracturing through the silence sent a chill down Michael's spine. Emma's face twisted in shock as she slipped, her feet losing traction on the suddenly unstable ice. Michael's heart stopped as he saw her fall to the ground, her small body sliding toward the edge of the pond, where the ice had already begun to thin. "No," Michael shouted, his voice full of panic as he skated toward her. The crack in the ice was widening, a spider web of fractures spreading beneath her. In a flash, he reached her just as the ice gave way. He lunged forward, his arms outstretched, and grabbed Emma's hand just as she plunged into the freezing water. The icy water engulfed her, pulling her under in an instant. Emma's terrified scream pierced the air as Michael, driven by instinct, dove into the frigid water after her. The cold hit him like a shock, stealing the breath from his lungs. Every movement felt like it was in slow motion, but Michael didn't care. He kicked his legs hard, feeling the weight of his winter clothes dragging him down as he fought against the cold. His arms reached through the murky water, desperately searching for Emma. Through the blur of snowflakes and ice, he saw her, her small face just above the surface, gasping for air. Her arms flailed, her body shivering uncontrollably. In that moment, all the fears of losing her, of failing as a father, rushed over him. "Hold on, Emma," Michael cried, his voice hoarse as he grabbed her arm. The water was shockingly cold, making it hard to think straight, but he knew he had to get her out of the water before it was too late. With every ounce of strength he had left, Michael pulled Emma toward the edge of the ice, his heart pounding in his chest. The girl was limp in his arms, her eyes wide with fear. The realization hit him hard. He wasn't just saving his daughter, he was fighting to keep her alive. His muscles burned, and his breath came in ragged gasps, but he wasn't about to let her drown. Finally, with one final push, Michael pulled Emma up onto the solid ice. Her small body collapsed against the frozen surface, her skin pale and lips blue. She was barely conscious, her body trembling uncontrollably. Michael collapsed beside her, gasping for air, the cold biting into his exposed skin. He could hear her soft breaths, ragged and shallow, but she was alive. That was all that mattered. "Emma, Emma, baby, stay with me," Michael whispered, his voice shaking as he pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her small body. He felt the warmth of her skin, but it was fading fast. He needed to get her to safety. He needed help. As he pulled Emma off the ice, the world around him began to blur. His breath came in desperate, short bursts, his hands shaking as he tried to move her away from the edge of the water. He was just a few feet away from the shore when he heard it, the sound of a car approaching. He turned, seeing a sleek, black SUV pull into the parking lot near the pond. The engine roared to a stop, and the door swung open. Out stepped a woman in an expensive coat, her face hidden behind a pair of dark sunglasses. She was tall, with an air of confidence and power, completely out of place on the frozen pond. But as soon as she saw Michael struggling with Emma, her face softened, and she rushed toward them. "Oh my God!" The woman gasped as she kneeled down beside Michael and Emma. Her hands were warm against his frozen skin as she gently checked for signs of life. Is she okay?" Michael's hands were numb, and his voice barely a whisper. I don't know. I I got her out, but I need help. The woman's face went pale as she surveyed the scene. We need to get her to the hospital. Now. Before Michael could respond, the woman turned to her driver, who had just emerged from the car. Call 911. We're taking her to the hospital. The journey to the hospital felt like a blur. As the sleek SUV sped down the winding roads, Michael's mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. His hands were still shaking, and the cold from the pond had seeped into his bones. But his focus was entirely on Emma. She had barely moved since he had pulled her out of the water, and every second felt like an eternity. The woman, who had rushed to their aid, sat beside him, her presence a stark contrast to the storm of emotion swirling inside him. She had introduced herself briefly, though Michael had barely caught her name. He had been too focused on Emma, on getting her to safety, to process much else. As they approached the hospital, the woman's calm demeanor never wavered. Her confident, almost serene presence seemed out of place in this chaotic moment, but it was reassuring nonetheless. When they arrived, the paramedics were already waiting, and they rushed Emma inside on a stretcher, their voices urgent as they worked to stabilize her. Michael followed closely behind, his heart pounding in his chest. His head was spinning, the weight of the situation too much to bear. He had always been strong, always been the one to handle things, but now, all he felt was helplessness. Inside the emergency room, the sterile white walls and the soft hum of machines felt like a world far removed from the frozen pond. Michael stood by the door, watching as the medical team worked tirelessly over his daughter. His thoughts kept drifting back to the moment he had pulled her from the ice, the terror in her eyes, the cold that seemed to consume them both. He had never been afraid of much in life, certainly not the dangerous work he had done in construction or the many challenges he had faced as a single parent. But in that moment, he had been terrified. Terrified of losing Emma, terrified that his desperate, instinctive actions might not be enough to save her. Outside the room, the woman from the SUV was on the phone, speaking in hushed tones to someone. Michael could barely make out the words, but the intensity of her conversation was evident. She seemed to be discussing something of great importance, but he couldn't focus on that now. His world had narrowed to the sterile room where his daughter lay, fighting for her life. The woman approached him a few moments later, her face now free of the concern that had clouded it when they first arrived. She gave him a small, reassuring smile, though Michael could see the underlying tension in her eyes. They're doing everything they can, she said softly, her voice steady and comforting. Michael nodded absently, still staring at the door to Emma's room. He wanted to believe her, but he couldn't let go of the fear that had taken root deep within him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door to Emma's room opened. A doctor emerged, his face grim but not entirely devoid of hope. Michael's heart skipped a beat as he rushed forward to meet him, his voice barely a whisper as he asked, "How is she?" The doctor nodded slowly, his eyes betraying a deep sympathy. "She's stable now," he said, his tone soft but firm. "We've managed to warm her up and stabilize her vitals. She's still unconscious, but the worst is over." Relief flooded Michael's chest, but it was tempered by the lingering fear that gripped his heart. Emma was alive, but she wasn't out of the woods yet. He thanked the doctor, his voice thick with emotion, before following him into the room. Emma lay on the bed, her small body hooked up to several machines that beeped rhythmically, monitoring her vital signs. Her face was pale, her lips tinged blue, but the steady rise and fall of her chest brought some peace to Michael's racing mind. As he sat beside her, his hand gently resting on hers, the woman entered the room quietly. She had changed into a more professional outfit, the expensive coat replaced with a sharp, tailored suit. She carried herself with the same confidence as before, though now there was a softness to her, an empathy that Michael hadn't expected from someone like her. "I'll make sure everything is taken care of," she said quietly, her voice low and comforting. "You don't need to worry about anything." Michael turned to her, his brow furrowing slightly. He didn't understand. Who was she really? Why had she helped them? He wasn't sure, but at that moment, he was too exhausted to ask the questions that burned in his mind. The woman's presence had brought Emma a sense of safety, and that was enough for now. He couldn't bring himself to question it. For the next few hours, the hospital room was filled with a tense silence. Michael remained by Emma's side, watching her every breath, counting the minutes that ticked by. His thoughts wandered back to the woman, her calm composure, the way she had taken charge in such a frantic situation. She had been the first to step in when everything seemed to be falling apart. Her actions had saved Emma's life, but there was something more to her, something Michael couldn't quite place. As the evening wore on, the woman left the room briefly, and Michael was left alone with his daughter. In the stillness, he found himself reflecting on how fragile life was. He had always known that things could change in an instant, but never before had he experienced it so vividly. One moment, he was skating with his daughter on the pond, enjoying a peaceful day, and the next, he was fighting to save her from the icy grip of the water. Life had a way of testing you, of pushing you to your limits. But as he looked down at Emma, her hand still clutched in his, he knew one thing for sure: he would do anything to protect her. He didn't know who this woman was, or why she had helped them, but he couldn't deny the fact that her actions had made all the difference. And somehow, he felt that their paths were now intertwined, in a way he couldn't yet understand. As night fell, the hospital room grew quiet, and the weight of the day began to settle over Michael. His body ached from the cold, and his mind was still racing. But as he sat there, watching over his daughter, he felt a glimmer of hope. Emma was alive. She would make it through this. And as long as they had each other, they could face whatever came next. The next few days passed in a blur of hospital visits, waiting rooms, and quiet moments by Emma's bedside. She had been stable for the last few hours, but still unconscious, her body slowly recovering from the shock of the cold water. Michael had barely left her side, the thought of leaving her even for a moment unbearable. His mind, however, was filled with questions. Who was the woman who had helped them so selflessly? Why had she been there at that exact moment? And what did she want from him? As the hours turned into days, Michael found himself reflecting more on the strange turn of events. He had always worked hard for everything he had. Nothing in his life had come easily. A construction worker by trade, Michael had spent years on job sites, moving from one project to the next, always working to provide for Emma. His life had been simple, straightforward, with no room for luxury or the complications of the world outside his own. But everything had changed the day he saved Emma from the freezing waters. And now, with the strange woman by his side, everything was beginning to feel even more surreal. The woman, whose name Michael had learned was Victoria Blackwood, was not like anyone he had ever met. She was polished, confident, and seemingly at ease in any situation. She never questioned the severity of the situation, she simply acted. Even when Emma's condition was still critical, Victoria had taken charge, coordinating everything from the hospital staff to the media, ensuring that everything was handled with precision and care. Michael couldn't help but wonder what kind of world she came from. Victoria had visited the hospital daily, checking in on Emma, offering support and comfort. She made sure Michael had everything he needed, from blankets to food to the occasional cup of coffee. Her quiet, steady presence had a calming effect on him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than met the eye. One morning, just as Michael was beginning to think that maybe things were returning to normal, Victoria approached him with an offer. It came as a surprise, something Michael hadn't expected, and yet, deep down, he had a sense that it was inevitable. "I know this may seem out of the blue," Victoria said, her voice soft but firm, "but I want to offer you something. I know you've been through a lot, and I've been impressed by your strength, by the way you've handled everything for Emma. I've been thinking about how we can help you, how we can give you a future that's more than just the struggles you've been through." Michael, still reeling from the past few days, didn't know what to say. He had been so focused on Emma's recovery that he hadn't really thought about the future, hadn't thought about anything beyond the next hour, the next minute. But the weight of her words hung in the air, and he knew he couldn't avoid the conversation any longer. Victoria continued, explaining that she worked for the Blackwood Foundation, a philanthropic organization that funded various projects across the country. She spoke with passion about their mission, about how they focused on community outreach, safety initiatives, and educational programs. The foundation, she told him, was looking for someone with real-world experience, someone who had spent years in the trenches, working on construction sites, someone who understood the importance of safety and the challenges faced by everyday people. As she spoke, Michael felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't something he had dared to dream about before, but the thought of having a real opportunity, something beyond his daily grind, stirred something inside him. He had always believed that hard work was the key to success, but he had never imagined that something like this could fall into his lap. Victoria explained that they needed someone like him, a construction worker, a safety expert, who could bridge the gap between practical experience and the foundation's more bureaucratic goals. She was offering him a position within the organization, a chance to make a difference on a larger scale. She didn't promise him fame or fortune, but she did offer him something he had never had before, a chance to build something meaningful, something that could change lives. For a moment, Michael was silent, processing her words. He had always lived in the world of hard labor, of hands-on work. He had never imagined himself in a boardroom, discussing safety programs or educational grants. But the more he thought about it, the more the idea began to make sense. It wasn't just about him. It was about Emma, about giving her a future that wasn't confined to the small, narrow world he had known. The offer was more than just a job. It was a lifeline, a chance to build something better for both of them. The thought of it made Michael's chest tighten with emotion. But there was a catch. He knew there was always a catch. He had spent his life in the construction business, and he knew that opportunities like this didn't come without their challenges. Still, the possibility of creating something real, something lasting, was too much to ignore. It wasn't just about the money or the prestige. It was about the work, the chance to make a difference. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that he was tired of just surviving. He wanted to build something that mattered, something that would leave a mark, not just on the world but on his daughter's future. When Victoria finished speaking, Michael took a deep breath, his mind still whirling with the implications of her offer. He glanced at Emma, still asleep in the hospital bed, and made a silent promise to her that he would do whatever it took to give her the best life possible. Finally, he looked up at Victoria, meeting her gaze. He didn't know exactly what this would mean for him, for Emma, or for their future, but he knew one thing. It was a chance. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he might just be ready to take it. "I'll do it," Michael said quietly, his voice filled with resolve. "I'll take the job." Victoria smiled, a warmth in her eyes that Michael hadn't seen before. "I'm glad to hear that," she said. "You're going to do great things, Michael. I can feel it." As he left the hospital that day, Michael felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he felt like he had a real shot at something more. He had a purpose again, something to work for, something to fight for. And as long as he had Emma by his side, he knew he could face anything that came his way. Victoria smiled, a warmth in her eyes that made James feel like he had just made the right decision. She extended her hand, and as James shook it, he realized that this was the beginning of a new chapter in his life. The road ahead would be difficult, but it was also full of promise. And for the first time in a long time, James felt like he was ready to take the next step. James spent the next few days in a haze of excitement and apprehension. After agreeing to take the job with the Reynolds Foundation, the reality of the decision settled in slowly. There were forms to sign, meetings to attend, and preparations to make before he could officially begin. As he looked around his small apartment, it felt like he was leaving behind the last remnants of the life he had known for so long. The tools scattered on the workbench, the worn-out furniture, the photographs of Emma from when she was a child, everything seemed to hold a memory, a reminder of how far he had come to reach this point. But as he packed up his belongings, there was no doubt in his mind that this was the right move. The thought of giving Emma a better future, a future filled with opportunity and possibilities, outweighed the comfort of familiarity. She deserved more than what he could provide in this small, cluttered apartment. The life he had built through hard work and sacrifice was no longer enough. It was time for something more. And with the Reynolds Foundation, James saw the chance to make a difference, both for himself and for the community he had always been a part of. Victoria had arranged for him to meet the team at the foundation, and James found himself walking into their grand offices in downtown Denver, surrounded by sleek, modern furnishings and the polished professionalism of the staff. It was a world away from the garage and the apartment he had left behind. The walls were lined with awards and recognitions, all of them reminders of the foundation's influence and reach. But for all the grandeur, James couldn't help but feel out of place. He was just a mechanic, a man who had never stepped foot in a place like this. Yet as he walked through the corridors, he began to realize that this was his new reality. The work he was about to do here wasn't just about managing resources or overseeing programs. It was about bringing real, lasting change to the people who needed it the most. The first few weeks were a blur of introductions and training sessions. James met with various members of the foundation's leadership team, each of them more accomplished than the last. They spoke about community development, sustainable practices, and the importance of building relationships within the neighborhoods they served. James listened intently, absorbing every detail, but still, the enormity of what lay ahead weighed on him. Could he really do this? Could he take what he had learned from his years in the garage, fixing cars and helping people, and apply it to a world so different from his own? It wasn't until his first meeting with Victoria that James began to understand the full scope of what he was about to undertake. She sat across from him, her usual elegance tempered with a quiet intensity. She spoke about her vision for the foundation, about how they needed someone who understood the struggles of everyday people, the ones who didn't have the luxury of a safe, comfortable life. James had heard her talk about these things before, but now, as he sat in front of her, he understood the weight of her words. She wasn't just asking him to take on a job. She was asking him to help reshape the future of an entire community. The responsibility was staggering, but James felt a spark of determination ignite within him. He had always been someone who solved problems, someone who fixed what was broken, and now, he had the chance to do that on a much larger scale. His role at the foundation was to help oversee community outreach programs, focusing on areas like job training, after-school programs for children, and affordable housing initiatives. It was a job that required more than just knowledge of the system. It required empathy, a deep understanding of the challenges people faced, and the ability to connect with them on a personal level. James had spent years in the trenches, working alongside people who struggled to make ends meet, and he knew firsthand how hard it could be to rise above your circumstances. But he also knew that it was possible. He had done it, and now, he had the opportunity to help others do the same. Despite the challenges, there were moments of joy in his new role. He visited local schools, meeting with teachers and students who were eager to make a difference. He spent time in neighborhoods that had been neglected for far too long, listening to the stories of families who had been left behind by the system. And in each of these moments, he saw the potential for change. He saw the hope in people's eyes, the belief that they could build something better for themselves and their families. It was these moments that made everything worthwhile. Still, there were times when the weight of his decision seemed unbearable. The foundation was a world of politics and big ideas, where decisions were made in boardrooms and over conference calls. James had never been a part of that world, and at times, it felt like he was drowning in a sea of acronyms and proposals. But every time he doubted himself, every time he questioned his place in this new world, he thought of Emma. She was thriving in school, her passion for robotics growing every day. She had already joined the robotics club, and her dream of attending Stanford was more within reach than ever before. James had promised her that he would do whatever it took to help her get there, and now, as he sat in meetings with foundation executives, he realized that this job could be the key to making that promise a reality. As the weeks turned into months, James began to feel more at home in his new role. The work was demanding, but it was also deeply rewarding. He helped organize community events, met with local leaders, and watched as the foundation's initiatives began to take root in the neighborhoods they served. Slowly but surely, he started to see the impact of his work. Families were being helped, children were getting the support they needed, and for the first time in his life, James felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. And yet, despite the progress he was making, there was always a part of him that felt like an outsider. The world of high society and philanthropy was still foreign to him, and he often found himself questioning whether he truly belonged. But as he stood in front of a room full of people at a community event one afternoon, watching them smile and laugh as they celebrated the success of the foundation's programs, he realized something important. He didn't need to belong to their world. He just needed to be true to his own. James had spent his life fixing what was broken, and now, he was doing the same for the community he had grown up in. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't always glamorous, but it was real. And that, he realized, was all that mattered. Months passed, and James began to find his place in the Reynolds Foundation, his confidence growing with each new success. He had been given an opportunity that seemed impossible just a short time ago, and now, as he watched the community outreach programs begin to flourish, he knew that taking this job had been the right choice. The work was challenging, but it was fulfilling in a way he had never experienced before. He wasn't just fixing cars anymore. He was helping to fix lives. And for the first time in his life, James felt like he was part of something that truly mattered. There were still moments of doubt, of course. The weight of the responsibility never fully lifted. He was constantly juggling the needs of the foundation with the realities of the neighborhoods they served. But he had learned to navigate this new world with determination and a sense of purpose. He found strength in the relationships he was building, not just with the people at the foundation, but with the families he was helping. It was these connections that reminded him of why he had taken this leap in the first place. In the evenings, after long days of meetings and planning, James would return home to Emma, who had now started her final year of high school. Her dreams of going to Stanford were within reach, and James found himself more determined than ever to make them come true. He had promised her a future where she didn't have to worry about financial struggles or missed opportunities. And every day, he worked toward that promise, even if it meant sacrificing a part of himself. Emma had changed, too. She was growing up faster than he could keep up with, but in the best possible way. She had become more independent, more confident, and more aware of the sacrifices her father had made for her. James couldn't help but feel proud of the young woman she was becoming. She had inherited her mother's gift for finding beauty in the small moments, and as they sat together in the evenings, sharing stories of their days, he realized that everything he had done, everything he had worked for, was for her. It wasn't just about the job at the foundation anymore. It was about securing a future for Emma, a future where she could chase her dreams without the burden of financial hardship. It was about giving her the chance to become whoever she wanted to be, without limits. But it wasn't just Emma's future that had changed. James's life had been transformed, too. He had entered this world uncertain and unsure of his place. But now, as he sat in a meeting room with other foundation leaders, presenting new initiatives for the next year, he realized that he had found a sense of purpose he hadn't known was possible. He wasn't just a mechanic or a security guard anymore. He was a leader, a changemaker, someone who could make a real difference. And then there was Victoria. As much as James had tried to keep his personal life separate from his professional one, the connection between them had only deepened. There were moments when their work overlapped, but there were also moments when they found time for each other outside the foundation. The quiet dinners at her house, the long walks they took through the park, the shared laughter over something as simple as a cup of coffee. These moments reminded James that, despite everything, he wasn't alone in this journey. Victoria had become more than just a colleague. She had become a partner in every sense of the word. Their bond had started as something professional, but over time, it had grown into something more. James had never expected to find someone like her, someone who understood his world and was willing to be a part of it. And yet, here she was, standing by his side as they worked to create a better future for the people they served. The foundation's work continued to expand, and the programs James had helped implement began to show measurable results. More children were receiving education and mentorship, more families were finding job opportunities, and more people were gaining the skills they needed to improve their lives. But as much as the work mattered, it was the small moments, the individual stories, that kept him going. The single mother who had finally found a steady job, the young girl who had just graduated high school because she had received a scholarship, the elderly couple who had been able to stay in their home because of the foundation's housing assistance programs. These were the victories that kept James grounded. As the months passed, the news stories about the heroic rescue of the twins faded, but James's life had become something entirely different. He wasn't just a hero, he was a part of a larger mission, a mission that was changing lives every day. And as he looked back on everything that had happened, from the moment he had run toward that burning car to the day he had taken the job with the foundation, he realized that this was exactly where he was meant to be. In the quiet moments before bed, James would often find himself reflecting on how far he had come. He thought about the hard years of struggle, the endless hours spent working 2 jobs, the sacrifices he had made. But he also thought about the future, Emma's future, the community's future, and his own. He had stepped into a world he never thought he would belong to, and yet, he had found his place. James had always been a fixer. Whether it was a car, a broken family, or a community in need, he had always found a way to make things better. And now, as he stood at the helm of the Reynolds Foundation's outreach programs, he realized that he was still doing what he had always done. He was fixing the world, one life at a time. And as he lay in bed, hearing the soft hum of Emma's violin drifting through the walls, he knew that this new life was just the beginning. There was still so much work to be done, but for the first time in a long time, James felt ready for whatever came next. He had found a new purpose, a new family, and a new hope for the future. The future was no longer a distant dream. It was here, right in front of him, and it was everything he had worked for.